Good evening to our distinguished guests and to our audience here on the campus of the University of Ottawa. Good afternoon and good evening to Canadians from coast to coast watching on Facebook Live. Thank you all for joining us for the launch event of the Inspire Democracy's journey to running in a federal election. Nous accueillons chaleureusement les délégués du Forum pour jeunes Canadiens qui sommes-nous parmi nous ce soir. My name is Sahir Khan. I'm the Vice President of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy here at the University of Ottawa. Auparavant, j'avais le privilège de détenir le poste de directeur parlementaire du budget adjoint, où j'ai desservi les membres du Parlement et où j'ai développé un grand respect pour ceux et celles qui ont choisi de servir leur pays comme membres élus. But the journey to becoming a member of Parliament doesn't start after the election. It starts when an individual decides to run for Parliament. This decision is a profound one. If an individual was anonymous before the decision, it's unlikely that they will be so afterwards. If an individual was viewed as nonpartisan before the decision, it's unlikely that they would be viewed the same way in their communities afterwards. The decision has implications for a person's professional life, and perhaps most importantly, implications for their family and friends. En dépit des sacrifices, des risques et des exigences d'une candidature, notre système politique a besoin de citoyens et citoyennes qui se présentent comme candidats. Ce sont ceux et celles qui font un choix de se présenter comme candidats et qui leur soutiennent, qui donnent le souffle de vie à notre démocratie. Les raisons pour une candidature peuvent être multiples, tout comme leur contribution à leur communauté, province et pays. The IFSD's I Vote Je Vote campaign is pleased to be collaborating with Elections Canada to explore the journey to becoming a candidate in a federal election. This event launches the Inspire Democracy series on the candidate journey backed by the steadfast support of CPAC and the volunteer students of the I Vote Je Vote campaign here at the campus of the University of Ottawa. At this time, I'd like to welcome Lisa Drouillard, Director of Outreach and Stakeholder Engagement from Elections Canada, to say a few words about the Inspire Democracy initiative. Lisa.
Thank you so much, and good evening, bonsoir. I really want to thank the Institute for Fiscal Studies and Democracy, I Vote Je Vote, and the University of Ottawa for hosting this event this evening. On behalf of Elections Canada, I'm really pleased to be here today, and it's really exciting for us to be joined by such a large and enthusiastic group as we launch Elections Canada's Inspire Democracy Toolkit, the first of which is the journey to running in a federal election. Inspirer la démocratie est un programme d'Élections Canada offert en collaboration avec des organismes intervenants qui veillent à ce que tous les Canadiens disposent de l'information nécessaire pour participer au processus électoral. En réponse aux commentaires recueillis de nos intervenants, nous avons tourné notre attention afin d'éliminer les obstacles qui pourraient rencontrer les candidats canadiens dans leur participation électorale. Running in a federal election can be a complicated journey. We recognize this, but we also recognize that just because there's information available on our website, etc., doesn't mean that it's accessible or easy to navigate. There's complex processes, rules, and considerations, and many players involved in candidacy. Some questions need to be addressed as soon as someone decides that they even might want to run. And so we hope that the Elections Canada's new Inspire Democracy Toolkit will be helpful. Over the last few months, we've worked with a network of stakeholders to identify and understand the difficulties that are faced by actual and prospective candidates. The Institute for Fiscal Studies and Democracy has been especially helpful in reaching out to former candidates and people with experience in assisting candidates. From these interactions, they're compiling a whole series of videos that we hope that you'll see soon. That will allow us to look at the experience of former candidates and people with experience in helping them. From these interactions, we'll get a greater sense of what that journey is all about. The videos will be available on the Inspire Democracy website in a few weeks, along with more instructional videos that have been prepared by an organization called Springtide in Halifax, looking at different parts of the candidate's journey. All registered parties, both large and small, have been engaged in the development of different components of this toolkit on being a candidate. Les partis politiques de tous les horizons ont joué un rôle important dans la mise en commun des étapes au parcours d'un candidat. Ils nous ont aidés à expliquer pleinement l'acheminement qui doit entreprendre une personne qui déciderait de s'affiler avec un parti. En effet, la trousse que nous lançons aujourd'hui est le résultat d'efforts de collaboration visant à fournir aux Canadiens l'information dont ils ont besoin pour devenir un candidat. The toolkit is in essence a map that allows people wishing to run or those wanting to help someone to run to situate themselves as part of a journey. The map is divided into 4 key stages: thinking about being a candidate, becoming a candidate, being a candidate, and reporting on their whole experience, including the whole political financing aspect. But it's developed in a way that's modular, so depending on where you are in terms of the information you have and your experience, where you are in that journey, you can get to the information you need in a fairly intuitive way. So as you'll hear from today's panelists, each step in the journey involves a unique set of challenges. The goal of the toolkit is to simplify the overall process by compiling the requirements into one simple, easy-to-read document, which is complemented by videos, checklists, and reminders for people at each step in their journey. We're also launching a workshop package. We don't try to do all the outreach that is required to engage Canadians around the electoral process ourselves. We always try to work in such a way that we hand off tools to organizations and individuals so that they can do that work with us and for us. So the workshop package is intended so that organizations or individuals wishing to help candidates can also conduct similar discussion panels and activities as many stakeholders in the room already do. Running an election is one of 3 areas of electoral participation where we know many Canadians face barriers to participation. Elections Canada will therefore be launching 2 additional journey maps in the coming weeks this spring. Working in a federal election toolkit engages participants in a discussion about the benefits of working an election as a form of electoral participation and giving back to your community, and it provides practical information on the processes and benefits of serving your community through being a poll worker. The toolkit on registering and voting in a federal election will then seek to help organizations and individuals who want to share information about registering and voting with people in their community. In the last couple of years, Elections Canada has been on the road with Inspire Democracy, running workshops, giving presentations, doing information kiosks. We try to go to where the people are, rather than host all of our own parties. And in that process, we learn a lot about what our key stakeholders need, and we'll continue to do this kind of outreach in the coming months. So I would encourage you, if you're a representative of an organization who wishes to know more about the toolkits or about information about the upcoming election at any level, we really invite you to get in touch with us if you'd like a presentation on any of these tools, or you'd like Elections Canada's participation at one of your events. And I can encourage you to connect with one of the many Elections Canada outreach team members that we have here. We've got a whole contingent in front. They often wear their Inspire Democracy purple. They're pretty easy to pick out that way. And as for the guide on the journey to running an election, I encourage you to have a look at it at our newly updated Inspire Democracy website and to share it with your communities. Whether you're here because you are considering running in the coming election or in the future, or you want to help someone else on their journey to learn more, or you just want to learn more about the process of being a candidate, we hope that the guide and the associated resources will be helpful to you. Demystifying the journey of being a candidate and making that decision is the whole objective of this initiative, and we want to learn from you, whether you're very fresh to the process or have a lot of experience like the people on the stage, to tell us about how we can make the resource better. This is brand new and very new territory for Elections Canada. We've had a mandate to provide information on becoming a candidate in the past, but we've never collected all of the resources in one toolkit like this. So we really do want to hear from you on how to make it better. Pour conclure, j'aimerais une fois de plus remercier à l'Institut de la démocratie et des études fiscales, I Vote, Je Vote, et l'Université d'Ottawa pour l'organisation de cet événement et la mise en œuvre de ce panel. I also want to thank all the panelists, in particular, on behalf of Elections Canada, for being ready to share your insights and your stories about the candidate's journey. And finally, I just want to give a big thank you to all of the former candidates who will be taking part or have already taken part in developing all the little videos to talk about the candidate's journey. So with that, I just want to thank you and welcome all the panelists.
Lisa, thank you very much, and we do appreciate the collaboration with Elections Canada. For those of you who are following events in the House, you'll know that there's all-night voting. They're installing cots in the House of Commons. The only break that Elizabeth May is getting is actually right now, and she's sharing with us, so we're grateful for the time she's taking. And I'm told I have to pack some dinner for her before she leaves, so that... So to help guide us through this process, we're fortunate to have two great moderators today. First is Dr. Helena Gaspar, the Director of Institutions and Governance at the IFSD. She teaches, advises governments, engages, but she also runs the I Vote Je Vote project, so we're very pleased that she's assisting today. Michelle Austin, Head of Government, Public Policy, Philanthropy at Twitter Canada, also former Chief of Staff to Rona Ambrose, Leader of the Opposition, Executive in Government Relations. I have to tell you, though, on a personal level, she actually cares about our institutions, and it's actually why we're so inspired every time she comes and shares her expertise with us. It really comes from a place where, you know, she actually cares about this country and its institutions, and she's very generous in offering to share those experiences and that expertise. So I'm really privileged to turn the rest of the program over to these two great moderators, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
OK, alors nous sommes bien contents de pouvoir accueillir ce soir ce panel distingué avec nous. Just to reiterate some of the messages from our opening speakers. The purpose of tonight's panel is to explore what it's like to be a candidate and what it's like to support a candidate. And this is all about the experience or the opportunities or the challenges that we don't see or we don't hear about. Nous voulons mieux comprendre les histoires des candidats, le processus d'une candidature, aussi les défis, les opportunités, et aussi qu'est-ce qui se passe après une vie politique. And with us tonight, we have current politicians, former politicians, strategists, and it's all about their experience, what it's like, and what they do behind the scenes. Nous encourageons certainement nos panélistes à intervenir dans la langue en anglais ou en français selon leur choix. And of course, we will leave ample time for questions from the audience en anglais ainsi qu'en français.
Thank you, Helena. So I'm going to start by introducing each panelist and asking them the number one question I think that is on everybody's mind, which is why, how do we start this process? So I'm going to start with Elizabeth May. You know her. She really doesn't need any introduction. She's the leader of the Green Party. She's a tremendous parliamentarian. How do you convince people to run as a candidate for the Green Party?
First thing I have to say again is that I will be running off because votes are votes, and it's sort of anybody who's, I know Allan's been in a situation, if you're missing a vote, my colleagues are standing and voting as we're here, and if I can only give you about a half an hour, which means I'll miss 3 to 5 votes depending on how slowly they go. So I just want to apologize off the start. C'est un grand honneur d'être invité pour un colloque comme ça, et je suis désolée par les circonstances ce soir, for a lot of reasons, including I don't have a caucus to trade off with, you know, right? So I'm there, except that I'm here now. The hardest thing, first of all, was I had a hard time entering politics. Very briefly to say that for most of my life, I've been in civil society organizations, charities, and I used to have people call me and turn my head and flatter me and say, we'd love you to run for us. And that included calls from the NDP, calls from the Liberals, calls from Progressive Conservatives. I never, and a lot of calls from Greens. I never was other than serious about the reflection. And I always said no, right up till 2006 when I was persuaded to run for leader of the Green Party, having not been a member, because working in the nonpartisan world of environmental groups, you couldn't be a member of a political party and expect that somebody you're meeting with, a minister, would think, well, sure, we're not going to do what the Sierra Club wants because we know they're secretly a front for the Progressive Conservatives or the NDP, or depending on what party I might have picked. So deciding to run myself was really hard. But the things that went through my mind when I was deciding were the things when I called women, particularly women, and try to convince them to run, some of the same things that were going through my mind when I would get calls. Things like, I'm a single mom, I'll have to quit my job to run because I can't run for politics and be in an environmental group. So what happens financially? So it was a big step to quit being executive director of the Sierra Club of Canada to run for leadership of the Green Party, which wasn't a sure thing. And I went to the Ottawa Women's Credit Union and borrowed money. It was an embarrassing job loan interview because the first question was, what's your salary? I'm unemployed. What are your assets? Oh, none. So I'm just saying, for women to run, it goes through your mind. What happens to me financially if I don't win? How does it affect my job prospects? What do I do next? So when I'm calling candidates and asking them to run, I'm really asking them to dig deep to values and whether this decision will actually be positive in their lives because you are expressing at the deepest possible way what you want for your country by stepping up. And that's what I generally do is a call to conscience.
Since we only have you for a short period of time, maybe I can follow up and ask you this question. Was there one conversation or one issue that pushed you over the edge? You said that people have approached you for a long time, and I think that a lot of potential candidates have that. They get approached and approached again every cycle. What was it that made you seal the deal to give up your job and run as a candidate and the leader?
Climate change. Yeah, it was 2006, and I knew, and I don't want to make this a partisan discussion, but I knew that the changes that were happening in this country in terms of partisan politics would mean that I would be more effective for the first time as a partisan actor and less effective as a civil society actor. And that was a conclusion I came to. I think I was right. But in terms of my timeline, I was 52 before I joined a political party for the first time. And I had run once before on a beau geste idea I'd had in 1980 as something that we dubbed the small party. As a waitress and cook on Cape Breton Island, I ran against Allan J. McCacken. This was an attempt to raise issues in the context of an election campaign. But other than that, I hadn't sought elected office. So it was a big step. But it was, and I think this is always a question for people: where am I most effective? Am I more effective right now being, fill in the blank CEO of a company? Am I more effective with my voice in national media or as a writer or an author? I talk to people from all walks of life all the time, trying to convince them that this is the moment to step into a partisan world of getting yourself elected. It's always a struggle because it is a huge change in most people's lives. And I have to share one quick feminist anecdote, and then I'll pass the mic on. When I'm trying to convince women to run, quite often they'll say, "Oh, I'm so flattered, but I'm sure you could find someone better." And the funny thing is, I also call men and twist their arms. I've never had a man say that. Honest to God, Allan, never. They all say things like, "Oh, I've got a lot on my plate right now, but I'm sure I could get to it if it was the right time for me because I see myself there someday." Sorry. Sorry. C'est vrai, c'est toute la vérité.
I 100% believe you. Okay, thank you very much. Next to Elizabeth May is Ian Wayne. Ian Wayne is here with his NDP hat on. He's the former strategist for Tom Mulcair and Jack Layton. Ian, do you think the NDP struggles now as a consistent third party in the same way to convince people to run? Do you have a special secret formula to convince people to run? How do you start?
So, for me, I never came to the NDP. It was always already there for me. My family was politically active. We had a lot of very lively conversations when I was a child, and the first memories I have of actually doing volunteer work on a campaign, I was less than 10 years old. Like I was dyed-in-the-wool, part of a political party. For me, I gravitated to the role of a campaign manager, office manager, working behind the scenes. But when I got to university, I did put my name out there to run for student politics, and you have to be realistic to people about the challenge that being a candidate poses. It's both thrilling and exciting, and something that is a very unique role to play in society, crucial to democracy, but it's not without its challenges. It's not without its costs to your family, sometimes their financial costs, sometimes their time costs. It's not without its challenges, both in terms of the how much loss of income that you might face, in terms of the cost of actually running a campaign. There's a lot of candidates I've known running, even for one of the major parties, who would have mortgaged their house, got lines of credit, risking their own nest egg in order to run, because there was this burning desire. I think that, like what Elizabeth was saying, if you're running just to have power, to be a cabinet minister, you're not usually looking to run for the NDP. Or the Greens. I'll concede that for sure. There's some provinces where we have formed government regularly, but typically the conversation is a little bit different. You are, like Elizabeth was saying, you're talking about values. You're talking about the kind of change that you want to bring to Ottawa, or that you want to bring to your city council, or the change that you want to bring to your province. So I don't think it's that hard a conversation to have, regardless of where your party is at any one moment. And the other thing I should remind everyone of, these things change rather rapidly in politics, and campaigns matter. You never know. We've all had the experience in our parties, especially for the Liberals and the NDP and the Conservatives, of starting an election campaign out where you were written off, and then suddenly, like in 2011 under Jack Layton, you're official opposition, and you have dozens and dozens of MPs who've never had that role before. And you never know. So if you run, definitely be prepared. Run for whatever's motivating you, but be prepared to win. You never know.
Awesome. Thank you. Next to Ian, in representing the Conservative side of the family, is Jenni Byrne. And the way that I describe somebody like Jenni Byrne is, when you see the shot of a leader, you usually see fussing around the leader as the backroom boys. And behind the backroom boys is Jenni Byrne. She has been a strategist with the Conservative movement for a very long period of time, and most recently with Doug Ford. Jenni, what drew you to politics?
Well, it's actually funny. I was thinking about this. I was taking the train from Toronto today, and Allan, I was actually thinking, you're actually the reason I'm sitting here today. And in 1995, when, as Justice Minister, you brought in the long gun registry, I would say the ineffective long gun registry, my dad joined the Reform Party and brought me to an event with Deb Gray, and I joined the Reform Party, and then I had my career in politics. So thank you for... I have a lot of respect for people that put their name on the ballots. Elizabeth, Allan, I have never had the ambition to do so. I have happily knocked on doors for candidates, but it is tough, and I get how tough it is, especially for women. I was a backroom person, as Michelle said, and I had people, one of the nicest things on Twitter that people said about me during the last campaign was, Jenni Byrne is an effing cow, a apologies to cows everywhere. So I get how hard it is for people to make the decision that they are going to put their name on ballots, that they are going to make the commitment to run, because it's not just a sacrifice that they make, it's a sacrifice for their families to make, for their children to make, for their spouses to make. And I think that it's something that that people should realize when they're watching and when they're looking at an election. Whether you support a candidate, whether you support a political party, you really have to look at the sacrifices that people are making in terms of running, because it really is a big sacrifice to make. So I'm not trying to be nonpartisan. I'm obviously a conservative, but I think that across the entire stripe, it is a very, very big commitment that one makes, and I think that it should be something that we all respect when people do.
Thank you. And sitting next to Jenni is her inspiration, Allan Rock. Allan Rock is here with his Liberal hat on, but I'm sure many of you know him as the President Emeritus of the University of Ottawa. I know him as my industry minister when I was in opposition, and I just loved the industry file. It was so exciting. So you've had a really successful career, including politics. You left law, I think, to become a politician. Was it the right decision, and how would you encourage others to make such a difficult decision when they're in the middle of a great career?
I can only speak about my own experience. And first of all, let me say how proud I am to be responsible for Jenni getting into public life. You've made a great contribution, and I'm very proud of that. I hadn't joined a political party until 2 years before the election that I first ran in. I first ran in 1993. And my life until then had been focused on the law. I graduated of the law school here at the University of Ottawa, and I devoted my life to being a trial lawyer, which I just loved. I loved being in front of judges and juries and cross-examining and making arguments, and it was my life. Toward the end of the 80s, early 90s, Debbie and I began having children, and I began to pay closer attention to what was going on in the country generally. For those of you who weren't around at the time, it was a tumultuous period. We went through proposed constitutional changes that failed, huge negative reaction in Quebec about that. There was really a crisis in the country about unity. We were at 11% unemployment, a stagnant economy, huge deficit in debt, real international concern about the state of Canada's economic future. And I began thinking about the country and our kids, and Debbie and I talked at length about this. And what we did is I joined a political party for the very first time. It was the Liberal Party in my own riding of Etobicoke Centre, because I was a huge admirer of Pierre Trudeau, and I just thought he was fabulous. And his protege, Chrétien, had become leader, and I liked him as a decent person. I joined the party so that I could raise money for our candidate in my riding. We had a woman candidate in 88, who ran in the free trade election, almost beat Michael Wilson, a great candidate, and she was going to run again. So Debbie and I wanted to support her. We went to meet with her, we talked about raising money. I became active in the Riding Association for that purpose, and then she decided to go to Europe and pursue an opportunity in the environment, actually, Elizabeth. The party was looking for a candidate in 1992, and they asked me whether I'd be interested in running for the nomination. It was the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my life. I loved my work. I had a young family. We just built a new home. Elizabeth, vote the right way now.
I'm voting for sensible government spending. I'm mostly voting with you guys.
Thanks for coming. There's a reason why she was elected by her peers as Parliamentarian of the Year. Anyway, let me just finish this quickly. Very difficult decision. I felt like I was giving up a life that I loved for something very uncertain, financially uncertain for the family. I'd made a deal with my law firm that if I ran and won, and then was a backbencher or in opposition, they'd allow me to open an Ottawa office for the law firm, so at least I'd have, some money for the family. Anyway, I ran, and if the question is, was it the right thing to do, the answer is, I think yes. I mean, in coming to my decision, there were really two factors. Number one, and Ian, we do talk about values in the Liberal Party too. What kind of country do we want? What kind of government do we want? Where is this country going? And second, I figured if I didn't do it at this point in my life, I'd never do it. And I wasn't sure I wanted to remain doing exactly the same thing for the next 30 years. So I took the risk, and I was elected, and I have no regrets.
Fantastic, thank you. And finally, I'm quite stoked to have our next candidate speak to us. And I say candidate because John Akpata has been a candidate for the Marijuana Party 5 times? Wow. How do you get to be a candidate 5 times? Like, how do you have that support system? Is it you? Is it your family? 5 times that is impressive.
Well, there are 9 million Canadians that now admit that they use cannabis. And it is, at the time, it was an open secret. So I had lived in the Netherlands when I was a younger man. I lived in a nation where you have informed consent about what cannabis is. People could grow it, people could use it. When I came back to Canada, I said, Canada's laws are stupid. They're syllogistic, they're outdated, they're not paying attention to the will of the people or medical science, and they're violently oppressing nonviolent people. It was Allan Rock in 1999 who stood up in Parliament.
Rock, the oracle.
He was not the inspiration, but I got to give credit where credit is due. It was Allan Rock who stood up in Parliament in 1999 and put forward the idea that we need to have research and medical studies and a medical licensing program for cannabis. Unfortunately, in 2003, that medical licensing system was deemed as unconstitutional. So, as a cursory user and as an enthusiast of the plant, I went to Carleton University, sorry everybody, I graduated with a degree in English literature, and I started performing poetry. So in the artistic community, there's a lot of cannabis use, and in 2003, when the laws fell, I noticed that a lot of people were cultivating and growing and using, so I started to cultivate and distribute cannabis for medicinal people. And in 2004, as an artist, I participated in the CBC Poetry Face-Off, and that was a poetry competition that was on the radio, and my poetry was broadcast coast to coast like 3 times. And in that poem, I said that we should take the queen off of our currency and replace it with a cannabis leaf. And I got calls from across the country, like CBC's phone rang off the hook, and people tracked me down and left messages on my answering machine back in the day. And I had a tremendous amount of support from the very beginning. And there was compassion clubs across the country that contacted me and gave me support. As an artist, I was able to travel across Ontario and meet lots of different people. And I never received anything very privately other than encouragement. People thanked me for participating. Medicinal users said there's only a couple of things that we can do to change the law. We can challenge the system in court, which is pretty much where the legislation came from, all the people that went to court to make those challenges, all the civil disobedience for years and years and years, all the Cheech and Chong movies and Bob Marley records, everything. And the Marijuana Party was just kind of like the cherry on top. It wasn't even the icing of the cake, it was just the sprinkles. And people were very, very enthusiastic and very supportive of me participating and doing it. The party gave me full power as a candidate. Nobody ever told me what to do, no one ever told me what to say. The Marijuana Party contacted me after they heard the poetry, and they said, John, join the Marijuana Party, run as a candidate, and say whatever you want. And I did. And I find myself on the right side of history, even though I never came close to winning an election. But I think that everyone that is thinking about it should do it. Either run as an independent or join a party that will let you do what you feel you should do. And go for it. I entered politics with no plan and no expectations, and it's been nothing but enjoyable and a lot of fun. And fairly successful, I think.
have to say, this is probably maybe some of my most favorite parts, let's say, of this entire project, is hearing these stories, because I think these are the things that don't come out when we see the faces on television or when you're watching the returns come in the evening of an election. So now I want to get into a bit of the process, right? Because there are all of these things that are happening behind the scenes that oftentimes we don't think about. And so, Ian, for you, from your perspective, what do you tell someone who's preparing to run as a candidate? What happens when they're thinking about it?
So I think that as someone who works behind the scenes in politics, often when you hear people like myself talk about it, it's as if we're talking about some kind of mystic arts, as if we're talking about something that's, shrouded in some, special sauce of strategy that you need to have. When the fact is, I managed a lot of campaigns before I started working centrally, worked for a lot of candidates, some who had a chance to win and some who didn't. You might be thinking about nomination. It really comes down to rolling your sleeves up and doing good basic organizing work. That's what it starts with. That's a big part of what it is to run a campaign. I talk about values, talk about all the higher-minded things that are part of the political system. But getting elected is about knocking on doors. Getting elected is about really engaging people for two reasons. One is to try and persuade them to vote for you, and the other one is to identify your supporters and encouraging them to vote on election day. And whether you're running a small campaign and doing it on a grassroots, on a shoestring budget, or whether you're running a large campaign and you have $100,000, it comes down to that same basic function.
And what's the party apparatus like at this point in the process? Does it kick in at all?
So when you're running for nomination, it doesn't really exist yet. There's some rules. I've been riding association president where I ran nomination contests. And at that point, you're basically trying to stay out of the way, making sure that people are obeying the rules, not saying anything, not making up. At that point, they can pretty much say anything they want, but making sure that people are aware of the policies of the party, are aware of the process that they're into, so that there's kind of equal information, and those candidates for nomination are all vetted. Once you become a candidate, then you actually have a party apparatus to support you. That takes a lot of forms, depending on what kind of riding you're coming from. Certainly, if you are in a riding that your party expects to win, you're going to get more support. You're going to get help with doing communications. You might be booked into doing media interviews. If you're in a riding where you don't have that kind of level of apparatus, usually there's a number of ridings like that. When we had someone running, say, in Fort McMurray in Alberta, that we weren't expecting to win that campaign, you would still want to help them with a more basic package of how can you run a campaign on a smaller budget. Here's the policies, here's issue sheets, here's some tips, here's a person you can call at the campaign office if you need help, and then encourage them to start building their own team.
Thank you. So Allan, when you decided that you were going to run, you already had experience in some ways with formal party politics, having raised money for the former candidate in your area. Right. So when you decided to run, what did you do? How did you start?
The hardest part of all is getting the nomination. In my party, we had a process of appointments. And for certain candidates, the Prime Minister would appoint you the candidate in the riding, and you didn't have to earn the nomination by signing up a higher number of supporters in the riding than the others who were running for the nomination. I had no interest in getting an appointment. I wanted to earn it by running for it. I thought it would be the best way to start in politics. It gives you some experience on the ground, and I didn't want to have this anointed position. So I started off going door to door to sign people up to join the party that I hoped would come to the nominating meeting a few months hence and support me for the nomination. And that is so difficult. Picture yourself in January in Etobicoke going door to door, meeting your neighbors. They've never met me before, okay? And I'm there to say, I want you to fill out this long form, give me $15 cash, and promise to come to a meeting at some unspecified future time at an undetermined location to support me against unknown opponents for the nomination for a party in an election that hasn't yet been called. Well, that's very attractive, isn't it? and it's 40 below, and I'm standing at the front door saying this, and people are saying, well, there's no election. Why are you here? So getting through that process, we signed up almost 1,000 people between January and May 1st when the nomination meeting was held. So that was the hardest part. Once that was done, as Ian said, the party then clicks in behind you. You start going door to door as a candidate, and you have a much clearer framework of what you're doing.
I feel like Jenni wants to jump in.
I do. We're sharing mics here. My guess would be, and any of the candidates that I have worked with, and I've worked on numerous nominations, election campaigns, and Allan could probably answer this. Most candidates or most MPs that I've spoken to would take 10 general elections over one nomination meeting. They would much rather. Nomination meetings are so tough because who you're actually going against are your people. They're your party. They're your neighbors, and so it's tougher because you feel that you're the better candidate, but you're actually going against people in your own party. So it makes things much tougher than a general election when you actually truly believe you are the better person for that job because of your leader and because of your party policy. So nomination politics are I think, probably the toughest in the parliamentary democracy that we still have to deal with. And sure, all of our parties have preferred candidates. All of our parties will have candidates where they win a nomination or they're acclaimed or what have you. But the vast majority, I would say, for all of our parties, they're still nomination battles, and they are a very tough thing to go to what you were saying.
So what's it like on nomination day, right, from the perspective of the candidate and from the perspective of the person who's standing behind them?
Oh, it's a tough day. It's a day where every campaign that you're in, I'll leave my colleagues to say, I have very rarely been surprised on election days. Like, usually you go in and you know you're going to win or you're going to lose. But the one thing about candidates, which I have never been part of, I have never been personally a candidate, they actually believe they're always going to win. So you could be heading into either a nomination race or an election, and you're dealing with a candidate that morning, and you might know that it's going to be like a little bit dicey, but candidates always believe they're going to win. Like, for example, for our party, a riding that I'll put out, tough to win would be a riding of Davenport in downtown Toronto, and we have always had a very lovely woman that has run in that riding for us, and I quite like her. And every election, she truly believes she's going to win. And if we were going to win, 300 seats in the next election, we would win Davenport, but we're never going to win 300 seats. So that's kind of in terms of like someone that's not a candidate in dealing with a candidate. They always, I'll leave this to you saying, but you truly believe going in for the most part that you're going to win. So
Allan, can you jump in on that? Just on the nomination question, we'll get to resources in one quick second. But did you think you were going to win on your nomination day?
I wasn't sure. I was new to the game, and there was a candidate, the principal candidate opposing me was running on a single issue. And her supporters were fervent, passionate believers in that position. It was anti-choice. She was an anti-choice candidate, didn't think women should have the right to choose. And the people supporting her were passionate in supporting her, and they were going to go to that nomination meeting. If it was at 3 in the morning in a snowstorm, they'd be there. So my big challenge was getting the 1,000 people I'd signed up over the previous weeks to actually turn up. We call it E-Day, and we had a team specifically to bring out the vote on E-Day, mobilizing the supporters, getting them to the polls, maintaining their loyalty and their interest was extremely challenging. And, we won. The numbers were pretty close, but it's a very difficult and challenging logistic exercise to get the people to the polls that day.
Well, thank you. And imagine, before social media, before these mass, tools to be able to get that kind of message out. John, in your case, what kind of resources or infrastructure does a candidate have to start thinking about and develop before, let's say, they even accept or win their nomination?
Well, if you join one of the what's the proper term, larger parties or the parliamentary parties, the Big Five, we call them. If you join one of those parties, you have to go through their strict vetting system and their difficult nomination system, and you have to battle it out with your own family to see who the candidate is going to be. But I think there's 14 or 16 federal political parties. And the majority of those non-parliamentary parties are smaller parties. They used to call us fringe parties. If you join one of those parties, they'll let you run as a candidate. So I had direct contact with my party leader. I met my official agent, and I also met the accountant. I just went out and had coffee with these people or talked with them on the phone. And once you get for me, the thing I had to do was get 100 signatures of people that live in the riding that you want to run in. And then you don't need to do this in the upcoming election, but for all the elections I ran in, you also had to come up with $1,000 fully refundable. They don't refund their candidates, but it was a fully refundable deposit. And once you have your signatures and your deposit, you just need one friend to go with you to the Friendly Elections Canada person, and you swear your oath, they witness it, and you're good. So I was able to have direct contact with people that had run before. I was able to have direct contact with my party leader, and I was able to have direct contact with a lot of journalists and lawyers and really smart people that were giving me advice and supporting me. But for me, I had 100% of the support of my party. So they never restricted, what I'm supposed to do with my hair or what I'm supposed to wear or what I'm supposed to say or not say. And I'm fortunate that the word marijuana was such a hot button topic that it could not be ignored. So the public gave me a lot of support. And then Elections Canada, I had joined the advisory committee for political parties in 2004. So going to the advisory committee meetings and seeing how Elections Canada actually supports, they don't give you direct support, but they're not your enemy. They're trying to help you facilitate running. So I was just able to use all those resources and kind of like agitate and rail against the system and do my own thing. So I didn't have to suffer as much as some of the other party candidates did.
And I think it's really important to remember that we spend a lot of time, myself included, focusing on what you call the Big Five, but I think there are 16 parties registered now with Elections Canada. So I'm going to ask one last question, and I'm going to give you time now to think of questions that you will have, and I'm going to make this a bit of a bear pit session. And my question to you is going to be, if you had to only give one piece of advice to somebody thinking of running, what would it be? And to give you a minute to think about that, I'm often asked that question myself, and my answer is do it for yourself. I know that you talked about how you joined for an issue. You both joined for an issue, and Jenni and Ian, you became really involved in a movement. But I always say to candidates, because the reality is you most likely are going to lose. Winning is not really guaranteed. Do it for yourself, so at the end of the process you're whole. So I'll open the floor and say, if you could give one piece of advice, maybe John, you're smiling, what would it be?
The advice that I would give is the same advice that I give to students when I teach poetry workshops. Most people are under the impression that no one else thinks the same thing that they do, and people don't feel the same way that you do, and everyone's going to laugh at me and I'll be all ostracized. That is exactly the opposite of the truth. If you feel that you should run for the bubblegum party, people are going to support you. So don't overthink it. Just do it. And none of us are losers. When you don't win a seat, they don't say, you're a loser and you're a loser too. They say you ran and you didn't win. And I would say, think about this, as some people have said, run, but don't think that you're going to win. If you don't think you're going to win, you should run anyway. And the most important thing, the most kind of like mind-opening kind of red pill moment in my life is when I walked into a polling station and I picked up an electoral ballot and my name was on it and I voted for myself. That affirmed to me that I'm doing something that is beneficial to me. I have self-esteem enough to run and vote for myself. I trust myself to govern my own life. And I'm not going to allow rich, powerful people to run the show without my input and without my opinion. Everyone has the right to do it. If we lived in another country, I probably would have been kidnapped or assassinated for some of the things that I said and did. Because I used to crash elections and crash debates and crash all candidates' debates. Say, you have to let me participate. I'm a registered candidate. You can't say no to me. And by doing these things, although people said I'm a radical or an agitator, at the end of the day, I laughed myself to sleep because I felt pretty good about what I did. And if you can have that experience, I mean, no one on this panel is going to say voting for yourself is not a big thrill. It's a huge, huge thrill, and no one can ever take that away from you, no matter how few or how many votes you get.
Did anybody else have some sage advice?
I'll offer my own view. It may be a minority view. The advice I'd give somebody who's thinking about running, apart from encouraging them to do it, is to make sure that you have the support of the people you love and who you hope love you. I've seen, because you'll find out. They may not vote for you. I've seen so many people in public life who've lost their marriage because there was a fundamental misunderstanding about why it was being done or what it was going to be like, what impact it would have on the family. I've seen so many people miserably unhappy in public life because there was a resentment by their partner about politics and what it did to their lives together. And I can't imagine going through what I went through over 10 years in the House of Commons and in the Cabinet if I didn't have the very active and sincere support of my partner. I mean, Debbie was just fantastic. And so, that's so fundamental. If you haven't got that, you're going to be miserable. So I would start there and make sure you have a frank discussion with your partner. They understand the implications. They're supportive. You're on the same wavelength. If you're not, you should seriously consider whether you want to do it, because it's hard without their support to be successful, and it's hard to maintain your relationship and your family if they don't support what you're doing.
I don't have a lot to add to that. I 100% agree. If running for office, nomination, and then general election is going to be a lot. If you picture right now in your head that you think it's going to be X time consuming, times it by 50, because that's actually how it's going to be. So if you don't have the support at home, if it's not something that your family or your support network agrees to support, it's going to be very, very hard for you to be successful. So I agree.
I would agree with that too. Even working behind the scenes in war rooms and stuff, our family sacrificed quite a bit, and without support from my wife and kids, it would have been really hard to do that. But they also believed in what I was doing. I would say, I don't know if it's a piece of advice, but there's something consistent with the politicians I've worked with who are most successful, or the candidates I've worked with who are most successful, but especially once they get elected, and that is their motivation. They ran for the nomination, they ran as a candidate, they serve as an MP because they want to serve. It is in the name of public service. And the very finest folks I've worked with, people like the late Jack Layton or the late Paul Dewar, and people from all parties who I've met, have that commitment to public service. So one thing you want to ask yourself is, put aside whatever ambition or other motivations that you may have, wanting your name on the ballot, wanting to see your face out there. Do you want to serve Canadians? Is this is public service a mission that you have? If you answer yes, then I think you are well on your way to becoming a strong candidate, and you should really seriously think about running then.
So for our question period, we are going to take questions from the audience and also questions from Twitter using the hashtag Prêt au Parcours, ready to run. So if we have questions from the floor, we're happy to start there. And we know we have questions coming in from Twitter.
Hi, my name is Billy Strafty. And my question is, what advice would you have for anyone who's youth, kind of the younger ages, willing to run or wanting to run to represent kind of more the youth vote? Because you don't see a lot of youth representation in democracy, and a lot of times too, people see young people as not being more eligible to vote or to run.
Thank you.
Well, listen, I would say, as someone that got involved in politics, not electorally, but more behind the scenes, the piece of advice I would give if you want to be engaged politically is just say yes to everything. If you're given the opportunity to go to a conference, to go to an event, to meet with a politician, to meet with a community leader, just say yes to everything that you possibly can. I'm not saying give up on your school. Like, I'm not saying, like, screw up things that, like, are going to, like, you know, in terms of, like, graduating or what have you. But if you have the opportunity to do things, just say yes, because you never know what you are going to learn from that, the people that you are going to meet, the experiences that you're going to have. Just do it.
Can I just add to that? I mean, I agree, but the other thing I would say is you don't have to start as a candidate. Every one of the major parties, perhaps the Marijuana Party as well, I'm not sure, has a youth wing, encourages youth membership, makes youth very active in the party at its conventions.
Well, we don't have a youth wing. That's why we elect younger members of Parliament.
And the gauntlet is down.
We don't put them in sandboxes. They actually get elected as MPs.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. What I was going to say is, by getting that exposure to the party, the development of policy, going to conventions where you do meet members of Parliament, you'll come to the attention of ministers who may wish to hire you in the summer or for a job in their office, and you'll also become familiar with the way people become candidates in the party. And we've had some young people, not just in the Liberal Party, but across the parties, who've joined the House of Commons at the age of, in the early 20s, the mid-20s, who've made a fabulous contribution. So there is space in electoral politics for that generation, and I think getting involved early in the party and how it works is a fine way of introducing yourself.
It's my understanding that there is a very low voter turnout for youth. I think for the last time I checked, 75% of females 18 to 25 do not vote, and about 50% of males 18 to 25 do not vote. So if you're 30 and under, you are considered youth. And if you want the experience of running in a federal election as a candidate, become an independent and go out and do it. You're actually going to get the experience of being a candidate. If you can't or are unwilling to do it as an independent, you can join any party that will let you run. And just do it. It's like jumping off the high dive. Don't overthink it, just go do it.
Listen, I agree in certain elections the youth vote has been low, but I actually have to give Allan and the Liberals credit. There were 2.5 million new voters under the age of 25 that voted in the last federal election. And they mostly voted Liberal, so I will say this, but they voted. So we're actually seeing an increase in young people voting, which I think is fantastic.
I think that, first of all, I agree. Get involved, get engaged, whether you run or not. There's a role for you in the political parties and in the system. The one thing I just want to add was we've elected an MP as young as 19 because it was a New Democrat MP in 2011, Pierre-Luc Dussault. I think that what was so amazing in 2011, while we didn't NDP obviously didn't think we were going to elect all of those young people when they first ran as candidates, but as members of Parliament, they changed Parliament. They really brought a new perspective and a different kind of energy to the place, and in a number of cases gave birth and were part of a different part of their life than is typical for an MP. And so I encourage you to get involved and change things.
Well, and just to that point, Andrew Scheer was 24 years old, the leader of the Conservative Party. He was 24 years old when he was elected in 2004, along with MPs Pierre Poilievre, who's from the Ottawa region. So there are young people in all parties that have made a mark and have been very successful in across the political spectrum.
And given birth while working. So I'm just going to take another one from my phone and then I'll take one from Twitter. Go for it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mina Yashadovich. I'm a graduate of the Political Management Program. And just a quick thank you to the organizers for extending the invite to the program. And thank you very much to the panelists for sharing their experiences. Quick fact, 15 years ago, John Akpata and I were at Carleton University performing poetry together and discussing cannabis legalization. Today, 15 years later, John is in front of us sharing his rich experience, and I'm working on the legalization team for cannabis at Health Canada. So as most of you know, cannabis was legalized last October. Government of Canada passed the legislation and the accompanied regs. So our job now as policy advisors is to analyze the legislation, the regulations, and try to figure out where the gaps are or where we need to publish some more policy guidance. So gaps is the key word. So my question for you tonight is, where do you see the gaps in Parliament? Where do you see the intellectual gaps, gaps in diversity, skill gaps, and what kind of new blood, what does new blood need to have as far as skill sets, some different ways of thinking, diversity, to strengthen the parliamentary process, to strengthen debate, strengthen diversity, intellectual thinking, and perhaps also independence and autonomy?
Great question, thank you. So where do you see, who wants to start? Where do you see an opportunity maybe from a gap? Ian, do you want to give that a run?
I think that one of the things we found in the NDP was there's lots of obstacles to certain kinds of people from certain backgrounds to run. It was lots of obstacles, as Elizabeth was saying to start with, for women to get involved, people from racialized communities and from different kinds of backgrounds who don't see themselves as part of the process. We need to make sure that we change that. Within the NDP, what we ended up doing was having a process for nomination where you can't presuppose who your candidate is going to be, but make sure that the people in your party who are in charge of recruiting candidates are responsible for making sure that there's candidates from a diversity of backgrounds and from a variety of places, so that you have a much higher possibility of encouraging and getting candidates from these different backgrounds. I was very proud of the Ontario NDP in the last campaign that they were able to get to a parity in terms of male and female candidates. I think that is a good goal. Like I said, you don't want to presuppose how the nomination battles will go, but the important thing is to find ways within your party to encourage people from diverse backgrounds. Of course, when we're talking about smaller parties or people who are not part of the party apparatus system, it's great to see Elections Canada doing this kind of work, encouraging people from diverse backgrounds to run as candidates for any kind of party or as an independent, but making it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, and finding new ways to engage people where they are, who come from backgrounds who may not see them traditionally see themselves traditionally as typical politicians, but there's a path forward for you too.
Well, and I would just like to echo on that. I think that political parties that have a diverse group of people within their caucus is very beneficial. I know for us, for the Conservative Party, we have people like Shannon Stubbs, who is a farmer from northern Alberta, who grew up Her father was a farmer, her husband's a farmer, she's a farmer. We have people like Bob Soroya, who's a small business owner in Markham. We have a whole host of a group of people. Michelle Rempel is an economist who worked at the University of Calgary doing research before she got elected. So I think just to follow up on what we've been saying, we have been lucky that we have a very diverse group of people within our caucus that add a whole host of ideas around the table.
I think there are two big gaps that people should be talking about, especially people who want to become candidates and change things. The first is the lack of women in the House of Commons and in politics, and there's a long conversation to have about what the barriers are, the role that money plays, attitudes that have to change. The second gap is the role of the individual member of Parliament. We're a long way from taking full advantage of the talented people who fill those 330 seats. The Cabinet has a lot of authority. The PMO runs the show. Both Prime Minister Harper, Prime Minister Trudeau have been criticized, and Chrétien before them, for hoarding the power and the authority in the PMO. But there's a lot to that, I'm afraid. And, you know, I've always believed that the committee system should be strengthened in our Parliament. Committees should have larger budgets, more autonomy about how they can carry on their work. And legislation should be sent to committee before approval in principle in the House. And that's something I did as a minister. We had a piece of legislation on assisted human reproduction. Remember all that very controversial stuff. And I was Minister of Health at the time, and I didn't have the monopoly on wisdom on how that should be done. I drafted a bill, I tabled it in the House of Commons, and I sent it to the Health Committee before second reading approval, because second reading means approval in principle of the bill by Parliament. So before that, we sent it to the committee, and we said, you look at it, you do a year's work, finding by looking around the world what works best, and bring back recommendations, which they did. There should be more of that, and we should put autonomy in the hands of committees and let them do the work they're capable of. We'd get a lot more in terms of substantive results if we allowed them to do that.
So Mina, you mentioned gaps in thought. When I first started in 2004, everyone was against cannabis legalization. In 2011, Elizabeth May was the only member of Parliament that voted no for the war in Libya. Libya is now a failed state. You can buy an African adult male for about $400. Women are cheaper, and children are cheaper still. So one member of Parliament was pro-peace and anti-war. That is a paradigm shift that all politicians need to start participating in. That's the number one gap in thinking. The number two gap in thinking, to my mind, is that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. We have people in this country that their rights are violated and their dignity is denied. And we need to prioritize that as acts of government. If I said that the government of Canada needs to invest in institutions that are based on world peace, people would call me a hippie and a lefty and tell me to go smoke some dope. But when it was said a Nobel Peace, the United Nations created peacekeepers, and peace prizes were given out based on that ideology. If you're a candidate and you say, we need to develop institutions and invest in mechanisms that are going to eradicate poverty, and actually do it. We live in a country that has access to trillions and trillions of dollars, and yet we still have poverty across this country in this province. There's people that don't have clean drinking water. If you're not part of the paradigm of thinking forward 10 or 20 years, that's the gap. That's what most of these politicians are lacking. Yes, they're lawyers. Yes, they're engineers, doctors, super intelligent people. But until they can jump that gap, until they can participate in a new paradigm, we're not going to progress. And it doesn't matter what your ethnicity or gender or any of that background is. If you're not willing to participate in a progressive ideology, we're just going to be business as usual.
Question? So the question from Twitter is, what do you think are the most common barriers that would-be candidates face, and what are your tips for overcoming them? And maybe, Allan Rock, I'll start with you. Can we maybe narrow that down and say, what is it that you hear from candidates when they say something like, I don't have to door knock, do I? And you say, yeah, that's the one thing you really have to do.
Well, I think the most difficult adjustment is public scrutiny. I mean, I started off as a very private person. And I remember the day after my nomination in 1993, I told my friend that I had been nominated the night before, and he said, well, you're no longer a private person. And it was so true. Getting used to the fact that you'll read about yourself in the newspaper, people will say crackpot things of you, and it'll be believed. It's tough. And, you know, I remember I went into politics, and I ended up with a lot thicker skin and a lot thinner hair. It was tough, and I wasn't ready for it. And I think that people have to be warned, especially if they're going to be in a prominent position in the cabinet, that they're going to be under intense public scrutiny, and you always play to mixed reviews, and your political opponents are usually very articulate and capable, you know, it's a tough daily fight out there. So I think that's part of it. I don't think money is an issue in this country, except in the category of women candidates, and that's a different issue. I think for most male candidates, because of the spending limits, because of the contribution limits, it's not like America, where the sky's the limit and you have huge expenses in statewide or national elections. But for women candidates, getting the money is very tough, and asking for money is difficult as well. So I think that's a major barrier.
Jenny?
Yeah, I agree. I think raising money is tricky for women, but I actually think for male candidates, for candidates across the spectrum, I think you're right. Once you run, your name is on a ballot, it is free game. It's not just when you're actually running for Parliament. It's a nomination. I've run numerous campaigns. I'm trying to think. I've never run a campaign, a national campaign, where I haven't lost at least one candidate. There's usually probably 4 or 5. And I know in Alberta there's already been one casualty less than, 2. I missed one today.
No,
2 candidates.
Randy Kerr and Kaylin Ford.
Yes.
Yeah.
I knew about Ford, but so it's just in this day and age, I'm never going to run, but I thank God every day that Twitter and Instagram and Facebook did not actually exist when I was all your age, because I can't imagine the stuff that would be out there. So it's a whole new ball of wax. If you're putting your name on the ballot, it's whether it's good or bad, it's all bets are off. You become a public figure.
Ian, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I've run opposition research for a central campaign. So if you get if you get a candidate to drop out, that's one of the best days you have in the campaign. Not because you're against them, but because you've disrupted one of your opponent's campaigns, maybe for a day, maybe for 2 days. When you do a campaign, you're investing $750,000 or $1 million a day the party's spending on a campaign. If you get them off their message for a couple of days, it's hugely beneficial. But I just wanted to say, as a campaign manager, because I haven't run myself, except for in student politics, as a campaign manager, there's 2 things that have both been mentioned that are always a huge challenge to get candidates to do. One is to get on the phone asking for money, which is a huge challenge. I've only met a handful of people who really, Jack Layton was one of them. He would volunteer to do the fundraising pitch because he loved to do it, but it's incredibly rare. And the other one is, as you were saying, to go knock door to door. Lots of people have a innate shyness. To put yourself out there, walk up to someone's doorstep, and ask them for their support is hard, and to get used to doing it and to go through it over and over and over again, you're going to get some really negative responses. We've done canvassing, I'm sure we've all done canvassing where sometimes bad things happen. I had one person threaten me with physical violence if I didn't get off their lawn.
I door knocked for the Reform Party in Quebec.
Exactly. I was door knocking for the NDP in a part of New Brunswick that I probably shouldn't have been in at the time, because it was, yeah, the guy said, I have firearms here, I'm not afraid to use them, you have to get off my property now. But obviously those are the exceptions, not the rule. But certainly if you're running for a candidate, you have to steel yourself up for some of these kinds of challenges, put yourself out there.
Okay. Before John goes, I always say to potential staffers, you're not a staffer until you've called somebody who is no longer alive, and then have to apologize profusely that your voter list is not up to date. It's awful, awful. Sorry.
Again, from my perspective, I'm not a member of the Big Five, so I never knocked on anybody's door. I never wanted to have arguments and debates about the validity of cannabis. We never had lawn signs. Even if we did have lawn signs, people would steal them and put them in their living rooms or whatever. And I'm very proud to say that as a candidate, I ran with no money. I never spent money to run as a candidate. All I did was go to as many public events as I could. Every time journalists would contact me, I would give them the most thorough interview that I could, blah, blah, blah. I could talk all day. And with social media the way that it is right now, I have a theory, and a lot of people have told me, John, you're crazy, that's never going to happen. I have a theory. I think that in Canada, somebody is going to run in an election and spend $0. They're going to use Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. They're going to tell people, I'm not going to make lawn signs. You print your own sign and put it in the window. And sooner or later, somebody is going to win in that way. The reason why they do door knocking is because we're a country from 1862, and that's what they used to do back then. If the Beatles had YouTube, they would use it. If Shakespeare had Instagram, he would use it. So if you're going to run as a candidate in the next federal election, use all the social media you can, and I consider myself the other 1%. I'm trying to do my job without the hundreds of thousands of dollars and all the money that goes along with it. And if you think you can do that, you'll probably be the person that gets elected in that way.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question. Well, I was going to take a question from Twitter. Okay, why don't you ask your question, and we'll see if we can connect some dots here.
Thanks. My name's Stephen Hepburn, and my question is, as a candidate, or once you're elected, what are the opportunities to speak your truth or to dissent within the party, show that you disagree? I understand that in an election that might be a difficult thing to do because you're trying to toe the party line, get your party elected. But how do you share your voice in those circumstances?
Thank you for the question. What I'm going to suggest is we are going to take the question and we're going to say, you know, what is the, let's say, the tension or the challenge between the realities of being a candidate and sometimes the realities of confronting the party apparatus. So that'll be one question. And then the other question I'd like to get at is for first-time candidates, what is the most important resource that they have or that they should have? And that's a Twitter question here. We're combining a few of the questions from Twitter. So what would be the most important resource either that they should seek out or that they may have innately? So I'll ask that you maybe pick one of the questions if you can.
Well, I'll start by saying in terms of the resource, if you're running for a party, we want you to win. So we are going to do whatever we can to help you to win. So you've got to understand that. We are going to put resources into your riding for the most part. We are going to do training. We are going to help you raise money because we want you to win. In terms of dissent, there is always, no one agrees with their political party 100% of the time. I've never seen it. Never has happened in my party. I know it's not happening in yours. It doesn't happen. But that being said, if you're going in to a campaign thinking, how can I most disagree with my political party publicly, I'm not sure why you're running, and I'm not sure why you're running for that party. So, because if you're going to have disagreements, you should probably, at least on the front end of things, have conversations with the party apparatus, with the leader's office, with the party before even the election starts.
Yeah, in terms of being able to, forgive me, in terms of being able to express your own views in the party, Two things. First of all, it is a team sport, and you only succeed in forming government in the House of Commons if you have the right number of MPs prepared to support the government. And if they don't support the government will fall. So support of those MPs is crucial, and that's why I think they should be empowered more significantly through the committee system. But coming back to how you express your own views, every week there are caucus meetings behind closed doors during which individual MPs say the most outrageous things to ministers and the Prime Minister, the most offensive, the most aggressive, the most disagreeable.
Oh, I don't know if that's the truth.
And so they should. And so they should. That is their opportunity to speak frankly and directly to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and say, things are not going the right direction. I disagree with this approach. We have to change this. They say it respectfully for the most part. But I'm saying that's their opportunity to speak truth to the power that's sitting in front of them. Once the caucus is over and you leave that room and you go into the House of Commons, you're on the team. There's a tension there. I've had legislation before the House where some of the members of our caucus refused to support it. And some of them were disciplined for not voting with the government. Some of the gun control legislation was very controversial. Members were concerned that if it was passed, they'd lose their seats. None of them did. Everybody was reelected 3 times after we passed that legislation.
That we could debate that, but
well, I can beat this point. We don't have to debate it. It's on the record.
not three times, Allan.
97, 2000, and 2000. Nobody lost their seat over gun control.
In 2004, yeah, I'll debate you.
Okay,
well,
we'll have a separate program.
We picked up 22 seats in Ontario.
As to that wasn't guns. As to resources, the party has enormous resources through its research bureau to support you in issues that arise, to give you talking points for town halls and debates, to give you background about the riding and voting patterns. That's very useful, and to share polling information with you as well. So lots of resources for candidates.
I just wanted to add 2 quick things. One, to just reiterate, the caucus is the most difficult meetings leaders ever have. They are places where MPs absolutely are free to talk about concerns that they have, issues they have. They are very open affairs that I think are important for the parties to have, but not something that you can do in public in the same way without losing a lot of support, without really ending up paying a big price. I just want to take a little issue with the idea of dissent. If you run for a party, you're running under a party platform. For us in the NDP, and this is true to different degrees for the other major parties, the policies that your party have come from party conventions where members go and debate and come up with ideas, policies, solutions to the problems that society has. At that point, you may differ on some of those policies, but by running as part of that team, you're running on that set of ideas and that set of values and that set of solutions that came out of that party convention. These aren't ideas that a leader has imposed on these candidates. This is something that the party has come up with in a grassroots fashion that then we take to the people.
We don't have a party whip. I've never been disciplined for what I think or what I say or my locks. So I can't really speak to the goings-on of the infighting and the political bickering of the Big Five. But with regards to resources, I would say that the most important resources that you have as a candidate are your family, your friends, and the people in the community that support you. I was invited to people's homes, I met people's parents, I met people's children, people told me their personal information about their health conditions. People showed me their gardens and their grow rooms. And people gave me a lot of encouragement. And the number one resource that you have as a candidate in an election is Elections Canada. Elections Canada is developing infrastructure and portals and websites so that if you have questions, you can log on to the website, you can fire off a question, they will fire it back to you. There's 1-800 numbers that you can call and go, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know where my polling station is. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. And they will tell you. They're there to help facilitate you
and everyone else running in an election. And if you're going to run, I do agree with the sentiment. You shouldn't be fighting against your party. You should kind of be on the team and agree with the direction that your party is going in. And if you're not happy with that, you can drop out and become an independent. You can cross the floor back to the marijuana party. We'll be happy to have you. And you need to be able to think for yourself. So the number one resource that you have is your own brain. So follow it.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is certainly a conversation that we could continue for hours, I'm sure. What I'll invite you to do is maybe our candidates will generously stick around for a few short minutes after to answer any remaining questions, but we'll have to close off the question period for now. À nos panélistes, un grand merci. Ce fut une conversation fascinante et bien intéressante. We're very fortunate to have you here and to have had this fantastic chemistry that, frankly, we could not have better planned. And so to our collaborators at Elections Canada, it's been a fantastic, I think, start, we'll say, to this journey. And we certainly encourage you to check out the resources that Elections Canada has available online through their toolkits now. So again, just to conclude the evening, Michelle, a big thank you for your fantastic moderation, and to our wonderful panelists for sharing experiences and insights, and I think, tips and tricks and strategies and perspective that I don't think we would have otherwise heard. So nous vous invitons à une réception. So you're more than welcome to join us behind the black curtains there for a short reception afterward. Okay. Thanks again for joining us.